Welcome to the Film Geezers podcast. Hello and welcome to the Film Geezers podcast. I'm Robbo. I'm here as always with Cheeto.
Hello.
And today's episode is going to be about failed films or films in development hell. So these are films that either never got made or spent time in what they call development hell. So they would have gone through lots of script rewrites, gone from director to director, producer to producer, even film company to film company before finally getting made. So I'll kick off, shall I?
Yep.
So first one I'm going to talk about is an undeveloped project by Orson Welles. So just to give a bit of background, Orson Welles, he started in the theatre in New York. He had his own theatre company, the Mercury Theatre Company. They actually transferred to radio on the CBS network, and it was called the Mercury Theatre Company on Air. And in 1938, he developed a version of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells to be a radio play, and it was broadcast live on Halloween of 1938. And the way that it was written, it was almost written as like a live news broadcast.
Yeah, loads of people thought it was real, didn't they?
Yeah, there's some conjecture about how much disruption it caused, but there's the start of the program there was a disclaimer saying this is a radio play, but a lot of people missed that and they actually thought that it was real and that Martians were invading, even to the point some people actually packed up their homes into their cars and left the city. But it just happens a week later, the Mercury Theatre Company on Air presented an adaptation of Joseph Conrad's novella, Heart of Darkness. So in the summer of 1939, RKO came to a then 24-year-old Wells and gave him an opportunity to go to Hollywood and make films. And despite never having made a film before, RKO made the unprecedented gesture of giving him full control, even including final cut, which is never done for somebody who's never made a film. RKO wanted him to film War of the Worlds, but he wanted to choose Heart of Darkness. Heart of Darkness is it's a novella, and it's set in the Belgian Congo in the late 19th century. And the themes are about imperialism, colonialism, exploitation of natives, racism, and moral ambiguity. But being sort of left-leaning, Wells adapted the story to focus on the rise of a fascist dictator to kind of mirror what was going on in Germany at the time. So he decided he wanted to play both characters of Marlowe and Kurtz. But the film would be filmed in long shots from Marlowe's point of view, and you'd never see Marlowe's face, and it would only sort of appear briefly in reflections in water or glass. And I think he'd already blocked out about 150 long shots. So RKO's location scouts, the set designers, special effects people went to work with the hope of shooting the film entirely on sound stages, because obviously going on location it's more expensive. And RKO had a policy that they wouldn't make a film if it cost more than $500,000. So despite all of the work on Heart of Darkness, it was never made, because the complicated shooting or the complicated film work that he wanted, it would require sort of complex sets, miniatures, matte paintings, and it pushed the film's budget to over $1 million. And obviously, because of the war, RKO lost a lot of its distribution in Europe, and they were sort of reluctant to produce a film that had overtly political message as well. So, based on that and the budget, RKO's then president, George Schaefer, decided to pull the project. So, obviously, Wells had to go and look for something else to do, and that's when he did Citizen Kane. So, Heart of Darkness might have been a great film, might have been the greatest film he'd ever made.
Wait, it spurred them on to make one of the greatest films ever
exactly.
made.
So, maybe he wouldn't have made Citizen Kane. It's probably likely he wouldn't have done.
Because he he wrote it, he directed it, and he starred in it, and he won all 3 Oscars for Citizen Kane, didn't he?
He co-wrote it with Herman Mankiewicz, who wasn't supposed to get credit for it, part of the contract, but he demanded that he got credit, and there was a court.
Is that why Wells was the one who got the Oscar?
Well, they both got Oscar for writing.
Okay.
But they fell out and never spoke again.
Yeah, no,
because the court case ruled in Mankiewicz's favour.
Yeah.
But there's some, nobody really knows what involvement he had, whether it was just he actually wrote the whole thing or co-wrote it or just wrote a bit of it. But yeah,
it's meant to these things work. Like you said, if that film went on, then we may have not got.
Well, probably not. He probably wouldn't have been scrabbling around looking for. Because I think Mankiewicz wrote Citizen Kane in about 6 weeks.
Okay, yeah.
Because he was obviously couldn't make this, so he had to quickly find something else to do. So that is that's my first one.
Yeah, awesome. Very interesting. And this is the thing with this episode. We both found it interesting because there's things that we didn't even know and movies that we didn't even realise.
Yeah, it's surprising how many films. I guess what movie companies do is they buy up lots of scripts with the hope of developing them.
Yeah, well, they buy already used scripts.
Yeah.
But it also Universal bought Michael Crichton's screenplay for Jurassic Park, wasn't it, or something?
Yeah, it was that before it was even published.
So stuff like that. So they kind of it shows that intent, and they kind of put a risk on it, don't they? You know, so.
But then a lot of films just don't get made, or they run into problems.
They can sit on script, film companies can sit on scripts for years until they find the right director or something that they want to go with. So, but my first film is it has a couple of names, but it's most likely was going to be called Batman Continues, but people refer it to Batman. Tim Burton's Batman 3 because there's never an official name for this film. So this is a really odd one because after the huge success of both Batman and its sequel, Batman Begins, Tim Burton was readying a third film, most likely called Batman Continues or something along those lines. It would follow the events after Batman Returns, and it would have had Michael Keaton return as the Dark Knight. Robin Williams was approached to play the Riddler, which just is, I found it really weird. And Billy D. Williams was on board as Two-Face. Michelle Pfeiffer would have returned as Catwoman, and Marlon Wayans, yes, Shorty Meeks from Scary Movie, do you remember him?
Yeah,
Shorty,
yeah.
Would have played Robin.
Right, okay.
And that was all down to Tim Burton's, these are all Tim Burton's choices, by the way, because they let him cast his own film, you know.
Because that wasn't made, was that then the Batman and Robin film with Val Kilmer in it, or was that the Clooney one? I can't remember now.
Yeah. It went on to that one. So
which was it, Kilmer or Clooney?
Kilmer,
right?
Batman and Robin was the Clooney one, but this film, parts of the script went to the Kilmer and the Clooney one.
Oh, right,
so,
okay.
I think that would have been one of the most weird things about the film being. Having Marlon Wayans as Robin, I just wouldn't never in a million years think that. So already it seemed that they had the ball rolling. You know, Tim Burton outlined who he wanted to star in this film, and it seemed that this sequel was imminent. You know, one of the many reasons that this film was never made was because the 2 previous films had been deemed too dark, and this is according to the studio, and this is something I simply just can't get my head around. You know, if you look at DC superheroes since they debuted as comic characters. You know, Superman has always been the shine of light, almost a beacon of hope, and Batman has been the dark, gritty, and mysterious character. And I just think you can't. What I'm trying to say is that Batman as a film is supposed to be dark, and for some reason the studio and some viewers didn't like it.
Yeah, well, the 60s TV show was definitely not dark. It was kind of campy, and I think that's what the Batman and Robin got a bit like that.
Yeah, 100%. With the Adam West 60s, you couldn't be further from the actual proper character of Batman, you know?
Yeah.
But he's meant to be dark, this dark character, but I really don't get it. And Tim Burton, actually, it's odd because Tim Burton actually hates sequels. That's him quoted saying he hates sequels. And mine was the same reaction as everyone else's. he made Batman Returns and he planned on making this one. Why, if he hates sequels? It just doesn't add up. But I think the reason was because he did a sequel and planned on making this one because it was almost like his baby. It was his project. He thought he could really make a successful third film, and Warner Brothers didn't. They asked him to rewrite his script as something more simpler. Burton didn't like this, and this was one of the main reasons that he didn't pursue the project. Once Keaton had heard of Tim Burton's departure, he soon followed suit. Warner Bros. Had hoped that by offering loads of money and that Joel Schumacher now had taken Burton's place because they went around, they kind of panicked when Burton left because they were like, okay, who's an esteemed director we can go to, and they quickly just chose Joel Schumacher. They thought by picking him that it would be enough for Keaton to stay on, but it wasn't enough. A lot of the reasons why Tim Burton's Batman never became a reality was because, like I said, everyone thought the previous two were too dark, which begs the question, everyone loves the Dark Knight trilogy and they are some of the darkest films ever. So why didn't that many people like the original two, you know? Like Nolan's films are so dark and they're probably the realist portrayal of Batman. Yeah. Why didn't that many people like the original two? Maybe because it was a different audience back then, you know? It's
maybe, I don't know.
Or maybe because people were so sick of the campiness that the next two films gave us that the dark and gritty style was welcomed. The other reason that this film never transpired was because of money. As always, it's always about money, isn't it? Not from the films itself. They were both among the highest grossing films of all time at the time. It's because of merchandise. Burton's Batman just didn't sell enough merchandise for the studio to feel confident to pump a load of money into the third film. And like it was going to be this third Tim Burton blockbuster, and they just couldn't find a real reason to pump so much money into this. This was really the final nail in the coffin for his third. It was mostly about money. This film never got to the stage of principal photography. Nothing was ever filmed. Batman continues to evolve into Batman Forever, which of course is universally panned by both critics and the general population. They recast Val Kilmer as Batman, and of course Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones as the Riddler and Two-Face respectively. I would have wished Warner Brothers would have just trusted Burton with what he wanted to do. He obviously had a vision about how he wanted to round off his trilogy, and it's always going to be one of those what-if scenarios, you know? Because I think he always planned on having a trilogy, and always they say, don't they, the third one tends to be the most ambitious, with the biggest budget, you know, with the maybe trying to put your best work into the third one to round it off, but literally all these reasons, it was over money basically. They just couldn't see, they couldn't see kids buying Batman figures, which of course is crap now because loads of people have them, don't they? So
well, it's not just kids, is it now? It's,
no. You know. I was looking at a Batman statue. So that's literally the main reason why. So
that's interesting, yeah. All right, so my next film it's been hailed by critics as the best film never made, and it's Stanley Kubrick's biopic of Napoleon.
Yeah.
There's actually a Stanley Kubrick exhibition at London's Design Museum, and it examines the making of every one of his films. But the opening section is actually devoted to this film, even though it was never made. It's while it was complete in 2001: A Space Odyssey that he decided to make this film. And Kubrick is known for his almost obsessive attention to detail in his research. And he sent researchers all over Europe to collect everything they could about Napoleon. And he amassed a database of research, including thousands of documents, over 30,000 illustrations and location scouting photos. And he had a collection of books, of 276 books about Napoleon.
Wow.
And then he used that. So in 1969, he wrote a 148-page screenplay of his life. But rather than taking just a section of his life and making it about that, he didn't. He said, I'm going to do it for the whole thing.
Yeah.
From his birth in Corsica in 1769 to his death on the island of St. Helena in 1821. And he said the emphasis will be on the battles, which Kubrick called vast lethal ballets, which he would painstakingly recreate with a focus on authenticity and attention to detail.
By ballet, does he mean like it would be like artsy almost, like it would be a beautiful battle? Like
no, just saying like the way that the
methodical
battles are fought. It's almost like a dance, and it's almost like a ballet when you're fighting battles.
Okay, yeah.
But he felt relaxed, about it. He discussed in interviews. He said he thought it would take considerably less time than a Space Odyssey to make. He reckoned he could do the exterior shooting, that's battles, location shots, within 2 or 3 months. And then he reckoned that after that, the studio work wouldn't take more than another 3 months. And he was planning to borrow a maximum of 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry from the Romanian army. And he said, he's quoted as saying that recreating Napoleonic campaigns was not really as difficult as it first appears. He wasn't worried about budget because he was going to use the Romanian extras' uniforms would be made of a special kind of paper. So it's far cheaper than cloth, but you can't tell the difference on camera. He wasn't going to sort of build any elaborate sets because they were planning to shoot in real locations in France where a lot of these old mansions and things haven't really changed since that era. They've still got like that kind of feel and the furniture and everything. So he's just going to sort of film it with a small documentary-sized crew. Kubrick only had a pre-production agreement with MGM, so the agreement was he'd make a plan, a schedule, and a budget, which he delivered, but they decided not to proceed. And it's down to the fact of the timing. They think it's because MGM had just been taken over, and the new owners were more interested in building casinos than funding historical dramas with 50,000 military extras. And in 1970, Dino De Laurentiis's own Napoleonic epic, Waterloo, which starred Rod Steiger, absolutely bombed at the box office. Didn't make back any of its money, or didn't make back what it cost. So you can understand that MGM were a little bit hesitant about putting out another Napoleon film. And there's actually a book on it. There's actually a book written about it called Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon, the greatest movie never made, by Alison Castle. So that'd be an interesting read. But he made a film, 1975, Barry Lyndon, which is actually set around the same time. So he got to make almost like a Napoleonic-style film, but just not the one he wanted to make. And again, just down to budget.
Yeah, and that's, like I said, it's a running theme, isn't it, really?
Yeah. But you just... Like I said, the film studio just changed hands and they just weren't willing to risk.
Sometimes it just never transpires, does it?
There's lots of things that happen, and it's not. Sometimes it's not just one thing, but it's a series of things that happen, and they just weren't willing to take a risk on him. But I think it would have been a good film, maybe.
I mean, anything Kubrick does, is legendary.
Yeah,
so
pretty much, yeah.
But interesting as well. Right, my next film is I Am Legend, and I didn't realise that this film had a huge timeline, really.
Yeah.
I Am Legend has actually had a really rocky time on the big screen, and I really didn't realise. It was first adapted into The Last Man on Earth, starring Vincent Price, and Richard Matheson, who is the author of the book. I believe he done Duel as well, didn't he?
Yeah.
I Am Legend wrote the screenplay himself, but he chose to be credited with a pseudonym due to him being dissatisfied with the result of the film.
Right.
So it doesn't sound promising, does it?
That happens quite a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Where the
well-known writers just go...
they just don't want to take credit for it.
Yeah. Well, The Last Man on Earth is the closest to the original story, but suffers from there being a low budget and Price being miscast in the title. He does his best and is actually effective in a couple of scenes, but he's not exactly what you call an everyman that you'd expect from Robert Neville,
Yeah.
This version also allegedly inspired Night of the Living Dead, mainly the scenes of the mutants attacking Price's house.
The zombies.
Yeah. The book was again adapted in 1971 by Warner Brothers, and this version was the campy Charlton Heston take, The Omega Man. This new version radically altered the plot, turning Robert Neville into almost caricature of Clint Eastwood as the man with no name. It's a terrible adaptation of the book, turning the mutants into cloaked albinos who hate light and want to destroy the relics of the old world. So
I actually quite like that film.
I
it is to say he's supposed to be a scientist, isn't he?
Yeah.
You've got macho.
Look,
Charles
no end.
Yeah.
Hey, no, it's a good film.
Well, yeah,
but when you think that it was based on I Am Legend, you're like, okay, definitely it. They altered it a bit, didn't they? I mean, that said, it's a hard film to hate thanks to Heston's charismatic turn. You know what you're going to get with him, and the eerie scenes of a deserted LA. It's it's a really good film. Like I said, you know what you're going to get.
But I think it's of its time, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
You look at other films being made at that time, and they're all that kind of similar, that post-apocalyptic films, and they all have that kind of campy feel as well.
Yeah, I just don't know why. I just don't know what it is with Charlton Heston. Just he is a guy you cannot help but root for.
Yeah,
like he just has the charisma. He has, he's the leading man.
But he's not particularly likable, though, is he? That's the thing.
It's hardly,
you still want to root for him.
Maybe because you're jealous of him. That's
I don't know, maybe, yeah.
In the mid-90s, Warner Brothers decided to have another crack at I Am Legend. They reached out to Mark Protasevich, this is hard to say his name, Mark Protasevich, who also wrote The Cell, to come up with the screenplay. His screenplay had little to do with the actual book. He had lots of tropes and cheesiness you'd expect from a mid-90s blockbuster. A few positives that he did add to the screenplay, however, was the fact that he turned the mutants into these creatures with terrifying speed and agility, almost like in the actual 2007 film. He was also able to capture Robert Neville's incredible loneliness. Again, something the 2007 film does well. The studio hired Ridley Scott to direct the film, and they chose Arnold Schwarzenegger to play the lead role as Neville. Ridley Scott wasn't actually that big of a fan of Protasevich's work, but he chose this script over another script by John Logan. Scott saw the potential to turn the script into emerging with a blockbuster and throw in his Blade Runner-esque style. Like, he wanted to have this artsy style, and his ambitious plans are what ultimately doomed the project. He wanted to trim the script, and by doing this, the first act of the film would be near on silent. The plot would almost be the same as the 2007 movie, just with a different style. Ridley Scott actually almost wanted to change Arnie's on-screen persona. He wanted to give depth with emotions such as depression and paranoia. We don't usually get to see this in an Arnie film. He's this unbeatable, incredible monster almost, and it'd be a different take on Arnie.
Yeah.
I reckon he could. I think his actual acting ability, you can see sometimes like glimpses of it that he can actually do that type of thing. So it'd be interesting to see him go into like a deeper role. But even though this film had a lot going for it, a number of factors got in the way. Warner Brothers was coming off of a number of box office bombs, including The Postman and Batman and Robin, and that's the Clooney one. They wanted a film that was going to be easy to produce and make money. They just couldn't see it happening with this film. They also felt it cost too much, with Arnie's huge salary taking up a decent amount of the budget. Also, Scott and Schwarzenegger weren't exactly coming off their best work in Batman and Robin and White Squall. The movie also once again lacked any merchandise potential. And that seems with Warner Brothers a real huge thing. You need to be able to have that.
But I don't see how you can merchandise a film. There's nothing. It's not like it's a superhero character or anything, or there's any characters in there that you could actually merchandise.
No. Well, this thing, from doing a lot of research about these films, Warner Brothers seems to be on the merchandise, and they don't seem to think things very clearly. Yeah. But so these are the many reasons that Ridley Scott's I Am Legend never transpired. The only real good thing that came out of this failed production was that it eventually led to the 2007 film, with it taking a lot of inspiration from the Scott version. But it's sad because, like, Ridley, he's a guy you can just let him do his thing. You don't get involved with his film. He has a unique ability to be able to think of a story in his head and how he wants his set to look, and because he brought a guy in to draw what was in his mind, and he was describing it to him, and the guy was quoted saying this is like one of the most beautiful sets designs ever. And they, once again, Warner Brothers, they kept on dipping their fingers in, and like I said, it was almost like, it sounds stupid, but it was almost like Ridley was too ambitious with it. Like, Warner Brothers wanted a quick, easy film that was going to make money, and they asked him to cut a few corners, but Ridley was like, no, I'm not going to tarnish my reputation by cutting corners, making it easier. So
the thing is with Ridley Scott is, as we found out last week, is he can make a great film and then he'll have a couple of duds. So you can't really. I mean, I would have loved to have seen.
I think it would have been
film, but you take that risk that it might not be that great.
And that's the thing with Ridley. If you give him all the creative power, he can either make something brilliant or something too much, almost like Prometheus or something like that, you know. So, but yeah, it was interesting. I would have loved. It was probably on my top films that I would have loved to see happen. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger as Robert Neville, but you know, the 2007 one's good though, at least. So.
I was actually reading a bit about that, and somebody made a dark joke about it, saying that if Arnie was in that role, he wouldn't have any trouble snapping his dog's neck.
Yeah, that's gonna get a few hate comments now. Right, so your next film.
All right, yeah. This is probably one of the most famous development hell films, Superman Lives. So to actually talk about that, we need to go back to Superman 3. So Superman 1 and 2, they were global blockbusters produced by father and son production team Alexander and Ilya Salkind. Superman 3, which co-starred Richard Pryor, was a disappointment. It was made with a slash budget. It grossed less than its predecessors. It received mixed reviews from critics and audiences. So after Superman 3, they had a go at spin-off Supergirl in 1984, which Reeve actually refused to appear in. So the Salkins decided, and it was absolute box office bomb again. It didn't make back what it cost. So the Salkins decided that the Superman movies, they'd run their course, and so they sold the rights to Canon Films. And we get Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. It was an absolute disaster. The problem was they'd got lots of films under production, and they attempted to make Superman 4 for even less money than Superman 3. And they cut costs and everything from sets to the visual effects. Superman 4 was actually based on a story idea pitched by Christopher Reeve, actually, about nuclear war and the environment, etc. But it was an embarrassment to everyone involved, and it grossed a paltry $36 million worldwide.
Oh wow, yeah.
So
worldwide is not good.
No. Canon Films did intend to make Superman 5. It was unlikely Reeve would actually agree to appear in it because of the poor showing for Superman 4, but they did plan to make one with him as the Man of Steel. Now, what they planned to do was to cobble together 45 minutes of unused footage from Superman 4, along with new...
God, when a film does that, obviously they know they have no ambition and no money whatsoever.
However, nothing came of it, and Canon folded in the early 1990s. They went bust. So when they went bankrupt, the movie rights to Superman reverted back to the Salkins, but they created a Superboy TV series instead of a movie. So still, in 1991, screenwriter Cary Bates pitched an idea for Superman 5 to Alexander and Salkind, which would star Christopher Reeve once more. Bates' plan was to ignore Superman 3, 4 and Supergirl and set it directly after Superman 2. But at this point in the early 90s, the Salkins were producing Christopher Columbus' Discovery, which ran massively over budget, and it ultimately lost the father and son producing team $40 million. So the Salkins quit the movie business afterward, and the Superman movie rights reverted back to Warner Brothers. From December 1992 to October 1993, DC Comics and Superman saw a major revival in mainstream interest with their crossover story event, The Death of Superman. So Warner Brothers hoped that this resurgence in Superman interest could be spun into a new movie. So they purchased the film rights and hired John Peters, one of the producers behind Batman, to help bring it to life as Superman Reborn. Now, John Peters was a bit of an eccentric character. Jonathan Lemkin, a writer with credits on TV shows like 21 Jump Street and Hill Street Blues, was hired to write the screenplay. Warner Brothers didn't like it, so they then hired Gregory Poirier for rewrites, and Poirier's script lay in pre-production limbo until Kevin Smith came to the studio. The story of the failed making of Superman Lives is now so infamous that an entirely crowd-funded documentary was made about it, The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened. So Kevin Smith, he's fresh off the success of Clark's and Mallrats, was offered a chance to pitch to Warner Brothers. After being offered a variety of projects to rewrite, he expressed an interest in what was Gregory Poirier's script for Superman Reborn. He found it to be so bad and disrespectful of the Superman mythos that this fanboy fury got him a chance at writing his own Superman movie. And that eventually led to a meeting with John Peters. And like I say, Peters was a bit eccentric. He had 3 demands. Superman wasn't to fly, he wasn't to wear the iconic suit, and he had to fight a giant spider at the conclusion of the film.
That is ridiculous, isn't it?
And being Warner Brothers, right, he also wanted to include a robot dog sidekick for merchandising.
Oh, yeah, Warner Brothers are the worst, aren't they?
But Smith somehow managed to complete a script within these constraints that Warner Brothers was happy enough with to send it out to directors, including Robert Rodriguez. And it was actually Smith suggested Tim Burton, who made Batman for Warner Brothers. And so when Burton got involved, Smith was kicked out because essentially Burton wanted to rewrite. He wanted to put his own stamp on the film.
Yeah.
He signed on for a $5 million pay or play contract, meaning that he got the money regardless of whether the film got made or not. And he cast Superman fan Nicolas Cage in the lead role. Unfortunately, Christopher Reeve had an equestrian accident in 1995, which left him paralysed, so he couldn't come back and do it. But I think he actually acted as a consultant on one of the films. And the cast was potentially to include Kevin Spacey as Lex Luthor, which was a role he would eventually play in Superman Returns, Chris Rock as Jimmy Olsen, and Christopher Walken as Brainiac.
It's interesting cast, yeah.
So Burton brought on a screenwriter called Wesley Strick, who he'd worked on with on Batman Returns to rewrite the script. But unfortunately, the estimated budget climbed to $119 million. So Warner Brothers hired Dan Gilroy to do another script rewrite to help bring the cost down to a more reasonable $100 million. And again, the studio was hesitant about getting the film into production because of the costly flops, like The Postman, and the cancellation of the Lois and Clark TV series. Eventually, Burton got frustrated, so he left the project to direct Sleepy Hollow, and Warner Brothers shopped the Gilroy rewrite script around to other directors like Michael Bay and Brett Ratner. After yet another script rewrite, Cage eventually left the project in 2000, and he was left to go into turnaround. If you actually manage to see the documentary, there's actually some test footage of Nick Cage in the Superman suit, isn't he?
Yeah.
And Tim Burton apparently had planned to give Superman a much darker, like he'd done with Batman, a much darker edge, make him a little bit more soulful and moody, similar to Batman.
Yeah.
So after Burton and Cage left, it went through a number of rewrites, producers and directors until finally Bryan Singer got involved. Apparently, J.J. Abrams had written a script for Batman v Superman, and there was another script, I think it was Batman Flyby, and Warner Brothers decided that they didn't want 2 films in production at the same time, so it kind of flipped in between Brett Ratner and McGee, who made Charlie's Angels. But eventually, like I say, Bryan Singer got involved, and in 2004, and Superman Returns was released in 2006. And Singer got rid of most of the script, apart from setting the film directly after Superman 2, and ignoring Superman 3, 4, and the Supergirl series. So it took 19 years for Superman 5, because it is considered part of the original canon, to come to fruition. And there was a plan to make a Superman 6 with Bryan Singer and Brandon Routh, but Warner Brothers were hesitant to do that because even though Superman Returns made money, it didn't make as much money as they wanted.
Because it made about 300 million, didn't it? Which is, I thought it was plenty, you know.
But again, maybe it's the merchandising as well. I don't know, but they weren't happy with how much it made, so they decided not to pursue that. And eventually, Brandon Routh's option expired, so he wouldn't have appeared anyway. And then, obviously, 2013, Man of Steel was released, which was not a remake or a part of the canon. It was a reboot, And that was really just made to introduce the extended DC universe to go against Marvel's universe, essentially.
And it's odd, because Man of Steel is actually quite a darker film, isn't it?
Yeah.
For Superman, but...
I actually quite liked Superman Returns. I thought it was a good film.
I'm not going to get shot, but Superman Returns, I think, is my favourite Superman film. I actually love that film. I love it because it's dark as well.
Yeah.
And it's crazy that this film led on to what would be...
And I think Space is a great Lex Luthor. I mean, obviously he suffered some personal issues, but I think he's slowly getting back into film.
And you can't deny he's a world class actor, can you? So he definitely fit the role. But
and I thought Brandon Routh was
I thought he was alright. Yeah, he was really good.
Yeah. So
mental, but like you said, it's very infamous for how much hell this went through.
Yeah, it was surprising that there were 6 attempts to make a Superman film between 4 and Returns, and it got to, I mean, they give Nicolas Cage got 20 million, Tim Burton got 5 million for not making a film. And you think, well, they're throwing money away.
Isn't it? If they would have just bite the bullet and made the film, it's Superman, they would have made the money back anyway, but like I said, they're Warner Brothers really are a weird studio when it comes to that, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
It's odd because now most of mine, bar one, are all Superman films. So I don't know if that's a running theme where they're easy films to make and then they get too complicated and they just shelve it, But yeah, my next film is Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4. And Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy is universally loved. The third one, not as much. It is the blueprint on how to do superhero films right, but it was never intended to be a trilogy at all. He intended to do at least one more film. Spider-Man 3 hit theatres in 2007, and by 2008, Raimi was already publicly speaking about a fourth entry into the franchise. Both Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire had already signed up when plans of a fifth soon started hitting rounds. At this point, Kirsten Dunst, who played MJ in the franchise, hadn't yet signed up to portray the character in this film. When Raimi was asked about the possibility of making a film without MJ, he said that it was possible, but he liked Kirsten Dunst, citing her as one of his favourite parts of the franchise. He also stated that he'd liked her to portray the character again, and he was planning on having a story with her in it. He also planned on having previous characters like Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin and James Franco's Harry Osborn return, using a style that was seen in the second film. Even though they're dead, they were brought back through visions and stuff. So
I always love that when dead characters come back to life.
Believe it or not, Spider-Man 2 is probably the best of them all. Yeah. And it was this, but apparently the studio wanted the first Spider-Man film's writer David Coep to return and write a script. To everyone's surprise, it was Zodiac's James Vanderbilt who was brought on board, probably due to the success of the film. Also, he's believed to be the first writer to actually come up with the screenplay. Although playwright David Lindsay Abaire and Seabiscuit's Gary Ross later came on board for rewrites. In autumn 2009, while Ross was in the middle of writing his draft, Raimi was planning to shoot the film in March 2010. An announced release date of 6th of May 2011 was chosen, and Sony seemed to have confidence in the future of Raimi's Spider-Man franchise. This is because Vanderbilt was tasked with plotting out storylines for both Spider-Man 5 and Spider-Man 6. Even after all of the setbacks and changes with production, Spider-Man 4 still seemed like it was going to happen. And I think it was going to be like Back to the Future 2 and 3, where they would have shot all three, because they were planning on making up to 6. So they shot all three films back to back,
right?
Which is quite an ask, But a villain for the film was never fully announced, though, and it still is a hotly debated topic. Would it be the Lizard? Would it be the Vulture, or even Mysterio? Sadly, even to this day, nobody knows who is going to be the villain. They probably expect me to name all these reasons why this film never got made. You may be quite disappointed when I tell you that there was literally only one reason why this film never transpired. And it's because Raimi felt that he wouldn't be able to make the release date. Yep, that's quite literally the reason why. Sony, who are infamous for pressuring to get their productions moving, and Raimi just couldn't agree on a release date. He wanted more time, Sony wouldn't give it to him. Raimi also stated that it would have been possible to make the release date Sony were pressuring, but he would have had to cut corners. This just shows that he's a director who is proud of his work and that he has the high standards. With this film in the bin, Sony decided to scrap this production and reboot the series instead. We got 2 Vanderbilt Spider-Man movies directed by Mark Webb and starring Andrew Garfield. These aren't very highly regarded once again. It's another what-if scenario. If only Sony could have given Raimi a bit more time. Oh, well, at least we have those 3 original films, but like, it's just so stupid. Like, a release date could put this back, you know?
Well, it's amazing that they actually, how much money they spend on developing these films and then just never
It's the
go
most
through
ridiculous
with it.
thing. Like, just push the movie back, you know?
Yeah.
Listen to your director. There's a reason why you brought him on. And, like, Sam Raimi was the reason. I always thought it was quite weird because Sam Raimi was obviously the he directed the Evil Dead movies, and I thought it was quite weird for him to go direct the Spider-Man movies, but it was because he was,
they were kind of low budget indie sort of films, weren't they? And to go to a sort of almost like a franchise style, you know,
iconic character. Like that. He was actually he was a huge Spider-Man fan, and he came out and said, "I know how to make a great Spider-Man movie," which he does, and he's shown that. And it's just, if they would have just given him a bit more time, and I think the 4th would have been absolutely amazing. And it's by them planning on having a 5th and a 6th, they knew that he was the right man for the job, and everyone did. Obviously, his previous work, but yeah, there was one glaring reason that Sony had the money. It wasn't a problem. It's just, and merchandise wasn't a problem. Obviously, Spider-Man's the most, one of the most bought figures ever. Just they couldn't budge the release date, and he was like, "Right, I'm gone." And I think it's credit to him, like I said, that he wasn't willing to cut corners because he wanted to. He has those high standards and he's proud of his work. He didn't want to be known as the guy to just almost sell out, sort of. So yeah, he left on his own accord. So good on him. And unfortunately, we got the 2 amazing Spider-Man films. So
yeah, like I said, I think I watched maybe. I think I watched Raimi's Spider-Man, but after that,
yeah, the Amazing Prime. Yeah, it's not good, is it?
No, it's not. Okay, so my next one is Dark Skies. So, fresh from the success of Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977, Columbia Pictures, as always, wanted a sequel. Spielberg wasn't too keen, but didn't want what happened with Jaws 2 to happen with this, where Universal went ahead and made a sequel without his involvement. So he reluctantly agreed. The initial script was given a horror film treatment, initially titled Watch the Skies, which had also been the working title for Close Encounters. And it's also the last line in the 1951 film, The Thing from Another World. But it was changed to Dark Skies because they realised somebody actually owned the words Watch the Skies. Which is, yeah.
Ridiculous.
So, whilst researching Close Encounters, he heard a story from a UFO researcher called J. Allen Hynek about an incident that happened in the 1950s called the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, where apparently a Kentucky family claimed that they'd been terrorised by gremlin-like aliens. And they laid siege to their farmhouse, and they claimed they had to fight them off over a 4-hour period. Spielberg stated that he would produce Watch the Skies, but not direct it, as he was under contract to direct his next film for Universal. He initially asked Lawrence Kasdan to write it, but he was too busy writing The Empire Strikes Back. So he turned to John Sayles, who had written Joe Dante's Roger Corman produced Jaws spoof Piranha, which Spielberg had loved. Spielberg suggested Tobe Hooper, best known for directing and co-writing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, direct the film, but I think he declined. The film was scheduled to begin shooting after Spielberg returned from filming Raiders of the Lost Ark. Spielberg chose makeup and special effects master Rick Baker, who at the time was also working on John Landis's An American Werewolf in London, to design and create the alien creatures. Rick Baker built a working prototype of the lead alien that cost $70,000. And in the mid-80s, Sayles delivered his first, and in the end, only draft of the screenplay, which featured 5 aliens. Originally, there'd been 11, but they'd cut it down to 5. And each alien had been given a name and given their own personality and were going to look different. So one alien named Buddy, he was kind and he befriended the human family's autistic son. The script opened with the lead alien called Scar, named after the Comanche chief in the 1956 Western The Searchers, killing farm animals by touching them with a long bony finger which gave off an eerie light. And it ended up with Buddy, which is the good alien, being marooned on Earth. Although there were some differences over the new concept, Spielberg and Sayles parted amicably and the film project continued on. So while Baker worked on The Alien, Spielberg was having second thoughts about Night Skies. He's quoted as saying, "I might have taken leave of my senses. Throughout the production of Raiders, I was in between killing Nazis and blowing up flying wings and having Harrison Ford in all this high serialized adventure. I was sitting there in the middle of Tunisia, scratching my head and saying, I've got to get back to the tranquility or at least the spirituality of Close Encounters." So, while on the set of Raiders, Spielberg read the Night Sky script to Melissa Matheson, who was there to see her then boyfriend and future husband Harrison Ford, and she was also a screenwriter. And she cried after reading it, because the idea of an alien creature who was benevolent, tender, and emotional and sweet, and the idea of the creature striking up a relationship with a child who came from a broken home was very affecting. So when Spielberg came back from filming, he eagerly closed the door of Night Skies and began planning the film Matheson had dubbed E.T. and Me. Rick Baker had spent $700,000 on unused Night Skies designs, models, and animatronics, had a huge fight with Spielberg, which led to Carlo Rambaldi, who'd previously done alien creature designs for Close Encounters, doing the creature designs for E.T. Columbia weren't happy with the emergence of E.T. and didn't want to make a wimpy Walt Disney movie. So in February 1981, 6 months after Columbia's desire for a Close Encounters follow-up had been fulfilled by Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the special edition. So what Spielberg had done is release a special edition of the film, and that kind of satisfied Columbia as kind of like a sequel. They put Night Skies /E.T. into turnaround. Spielberg went to Universal, who had obviously produced Jaws, and they bought Night Skies project from Columbia for $1 million. That's the money that they'd used so far in developing the project. And Columbia would retain 5% of the film's profits. Now, Columbia were always like one step away from bankruptcy. And because Close Encounters had gone over budget and over schedule, it almost bankrupted the studio. But Columbia later said that that year they made more money out of E.T. than they did out of any films that they'd made. So this Night Skies sort of horror alien film eventually became E.T. And because it was a very personal film for Spielberg, it was about, a divorced, broken family, absent father, something that he'd experienced. He decided to direct it himself. And that's a common motif in a lot of his films, is that kind of divorce, absent father as well. It inspired not only E.T., but also Poltergeist, which had a family terrorized by paranormal forces rather than aliens. Spielberg produced it, and actually Tobe Hooper directed it. And also Gremlins, which had one innocent, kind member of a species of otherwise mean-spirited creatures attacking a town. And there's a lot of the motifs. If the original film, the idea of the finger with the light on it, and everything.
I clocked that. I was like, this sounds like E.T.
So that made it into E.T. And obviously, Universal wanted an E.T. sequel.
Yeah.
So Spielberg hired Melissa Matheson to write a script for a sequel film entitled E.T. 2: Nocturnal Fears. And the film's plot would have shown Elliot and his friends getting kidnapped by evil aliens and follow their attempts to contact E.T. for help. However, Spielberg finally decided to cancel the sequel's production because he felt it would damage the legacy of the original. Because it's a cute tale about a kid's bond with an alien and having sort of evil ETs around, it would damage that film.
Yeah.
So I'm not sorry it didn't get made, I don't think.
Yeah. No, it's E.T.'s a classic that should just be left alone. Even at the time, it should be left alone.
So I can't imagine like evil ETs running around.
No.
I think it would have just been another sort of kishy horror film.
Yeah. And it would definitely be one of those sequels where people watch the original, they don't bother watching the sequel. Yeah. So that was very interesting. Yeah. And I love it when themes of a previous idea find their way into the actual real production. So I love that. It's very good. Cool. Right. my next two films are actually films that actually did get made, but they went through absolute this. They've gone down in infamy by how bad the production was and how much of a hellish sort of environment it was. And the first one is the 2015 film Fantastic Four, and so the Josh Trank directed 2015 blockbuster Fantastic Four is well known to be one of the most troublesome productions ever made. 20th Century Fox released the film. It was meant to be both a reboot and a brand new take on the characters. The Fantastic Four films we got up to this point were the campy and hokey films of the 90s and mid-noughties. The film was meant to be grounded, dark and a gritty film, rarely seen in Marvel films. It was a much different but welcomed take on the characters. It seemed promising, right? The script had been written by Jeremy Slater and the team of Zach Stens and Ashley Edward. Josh Trank was unhappy with the script, so he set out to write his own. He shocked many fans of the four, including the producers in the studio, due to his vision being different than perceived. Executives at Fox were not happy with what they were seeing from the shoot, so they began dipping their fingers in and sending out people like X-Men writer Simon Kinberg to steady the ship, so to speak. Trank, meanwhile, allegedly went on a spree of bad behaviour, much of which he actually denies, and he was eventually sidelined while the entire third act of the film was reportedly reshot. The movie came out in early August of 2015 to complete universal resentment. Both the critics and fans absolutely hated it, and it was a complete box office bomb. The film's failure actually caused Trank to lose his job at Lucasfilm as the director of the now-shelved Boba Fett film. Trank remains hell-bent on getting his work out to the public, that he was bullied by the 20th Century Fox, and it was their fault for the film's failure. He also stated that that if he had been left alone to make the film, that it would stand up against any of the comic book movies of today. Many people actually believe that there is a Trank cut of the film, that this cut doesn't have any interference on 20th Century Fox at all. Fans have been protesting for the Trank's cut's release ever since the day the film came out. 20th Century Fox deny that there is such a cut, but comments online from Trank's socials say otherwise. Now, I wish that 20th Century Fox would let him get on with his vision. After all, he's a very talented young director. This is even more evident due to the film biopic Capone starring Tom Hardy. This shows the directing prowess that he does hold. One can only hope that if there is a Trank cut, 20th Century Fox will eventually release it. So, it's very odd because obviously this is a more modern example of a production going through hell, and it was actually Josh Trank. He knew this film wasn't going to be good when he got sidelined because it was just producers were getting involved, different writers were getting involved, and once they sidelined him, they didn't even bring another director in, which is, at least bring another director in to steady the ship, But he went online, he went on Twitter, and he basically trashed his film, saying his own film was going to be really bad, because he had quite a following. Because, like I said, Josh Trank is actually a really good director, and he was only 31 at the time, and he'd already had a really good filmography. Yeah. And he was just basically warning people. I think he nearly got sued for this as well. Obviously, definitely, yeah. But he's basically warning people on his own social media about how bad this film was going to be. Yeah. And I think that caused. The only reason why this film made money is because people wanted to see how bad this film was.
So it's kind of good marketing, even though he's trashing his own film. Yeah.
If the director says it's going to be a bad film, because well,
let's say all publicity is good publicity,
exactly.
Don't they? So,
and this worked in favour of 20th Century Fox, but this was just one where nothing seemed to get right, and once again, the company getting in the way of. I don't get what's the point in hiring a director. What's the point in hiring, a writer to go out and write the film, a director to direct the film, if you're just going to dip your fingers in? It's just.
Well, I don't think anybody actually sets out to make a bad film, do they?
No.
They want to make the best film they can make, and then things like that happen, studio interference, and it's happened, time and time again where the studio has had final cut and done it without the director knowing, and that's the version that gets released, and then it bombs at the box office, so they're all pointing fingers at the director and saying,
it's not fair, is it?
No, it's not. You can't win, can you?
But I mean, even this film's been out for 6 years, and even to this day, there's people online are protesting for them to release the Trank cut because they fully believe that he was he's come out and said that he'd done a full movie. 20th Century Fox say they didn't. So I don't know if 20th Century Fox don't want to release it due to them knowing it's a much better film.
Yeah.
It flows better, you know,
Yeah.
and it seems like it's a like a coherent film, you know.
Yeah.
So it's one that I can hope, because it's not a bad film. I like the, even with all the production hell, I like the darker take on it, because I love a darker film. But it just, you can tell it was the brainchild of 20 different people. You know, it just wasn't together, and it just flows so bad, and it's an absolute slog to get through. So one can only hope, like I said, that 20th Century Fox do release this trend cut. So right, on to your last film.
My last film is Creature from the Black Lagoon. Now, I'm a big fan of classic horror, Universal horror films, and outside of, you know, this is probably one of my favourite monsters. It was, the original is 1954. It's directed by Jack Arnold. It's about a scientific research team in the Amazon. They discover fossilised remains of a missing link between land and sea animals. But then they also discover that the creature exists. It spawned 2 sequels, Revenge of the Creature in 1955 and The Creature Walks Among Us in 1956, which actually features a young Clint Eastwood in it. As a little small part as a lab technician. Yeah. And because it was a successful film franchise, they hadn't forgotten about it. And they did that thing of, like a lot of companies did in the 80s, they look back at their archive of properties and they've seen which ones they can remake or work into a modern movie. So initially, the project was spearheaded by director John Landis, who had made American Werewolf in London. He'd made the Thriller video for Michael Jackson. So he had some pedigree as a sort of horror director, but he didn't want to direct it, he was going to produce it. And he wanted to coax Jack Arnold, the original director, back to do it. And he was largely working in TV. Like I say, Landis would have served as producer. He'd actually coaxed legendary British screenwriter Nigel Neal to write the script, and he was probably most well known for his Quatermass, sort of science fiction stories for the BBC and also for Hammer Films as well. But the problem was that Landis was determined that he wanted to make the movie in 3D, which the actual original film was made in 3D. But Universal didn't want to remake it because they felt it would distract attention away from Jaws 3D, which was released in 1983, to absolutely scathing reviews and tepid box office. So after that, the brief interest in 3D, which flared up in the early 80s, it soon ebbed away, which it did do in the 50s as well. So that might explain why Landis' produced Creature remake faded away too. Later in the 1980s, Joe Dante and Mike Fennell were attached to the project, but again, that fell apart. So it's one of those where other people get attached to it and nothing happens. So we're going to fast forward to 92. Chevy Chase was making a film, Memoirs of an Invisible Man, and he demanded that Warner Brothers hire John Carpenter to direct the troubled comedy thriller. Carpenter had gone into the project knowing it had the potential to be a poison chalice because Ivan Reitman and Richard Donner had already walked away from it. Allegedly, I'm saying this allegedly, Chase was known to be a demanding actor to work with, and the script had already been through several rewrites. But both the studio and director seemed upbeat about the movie's chances. It was a big $40 million summer effects movie, and that budget was more than 10 times Carpenter's last film, which was a $3 million cult gem, They Live, which is a good film. I love that film. Rowdy Roddy Piper. If you get to watch it, that's a brilliant film. Yeah. And it actually had a bankable star, you know, as the main character. So just taking that film had actually made him, Carpenter, a big name again in Hollywood because he'd suffered a few issues He suffered a few, like Big Trouble in Little China had bombed, hadn't it?
Yeah.
Even though it's now seems a lot of his films when they come out they bomb, but then when people look back on them,
Cult classics,
they
isn't they?
become cult classic,
Yeah.
and everyone loves them.
Yeah, everyone loves Big Trouble in Little China, don't they?
Yeah, but that allowed him then to have a meeting with Tom Pollock, who was the Universal's president at the time, to discuss new projects. And Pollock told him to look through our library of pictures and see if there's anything you want to make. So he chose Creature from the Black Lagoon. I know we had a little bit of a segue there, but we returned back to the main thing. So obviously Carpenter had pedigree, had history with Universal. He'd successfully remade The Thing from Another World into the 82 The Thing. It wasn't a success on release, but it became a cult classic. It found its audience on cable, and and now it's considered a absolutely amazing film, isn't it?
Yeah, probably one of the best horror films ever made. How to do it.
So he asked his longtime collaborator, screenwriter Bill Phillips, to write some different drafts of the project after Carpenter felt Nigel Neal's script from a decade earlier wasn't going to work. Now, Carpenter had worked with Nigel Neal before on Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. What happened is when the Creature from the Black Lagoon, Landis's version, fell through, Neal stayed on in the US and actually wrote the script for Halloween 3. And even though Carpenter didn't direct it, he produced it. And the problem was that when Carpenter had asked for some change, script changes, Neal had become, angry at that. And so years later, Carpenter would describe him as irascible and mean, which is probably why he wasn't in any hurry to work with him again. So Rick Baker did some creature design work. They wanted to get away from the sort of man in a rubber suit, but still retain the creature's overall look. Because that's the thing about sort of when you remake stuff, is it always helps if the person remaking it is a fan of the original.
Yeah.
And actually,
100%.
loves that, because then there's that connection then. And all that, they don't want to damage the original's legacy. So he wanted to retain as much of the original creature as possible, but try to get away from that, that man in a rubber suit kind of look. The problem was that Memoirs of an Invisible Man was a commercial failure. It lost $26 million. So Universal hesitated on giving it the green light. And the delay just caused Carpenter to leave the project. So that's really... And to be honest, of all of the films that we talked about, this is the one that I would have loved to have seen.
I'll tell you what, you showed me the pictures of what the creature was going to look. It looked quite similar to the original, but it just had that... Obviously, it was modernised, and it just looked terrifying, didn't it?
But I just think he would have done such a good job, like he'd done with The Thing. But
he's the master horror, isn't he? And he would have.
I mean, since then, they've tried to kickstart the project with other directors, including Peter Jackson, Stephen Sommers, Brett Ratner, Breck Eisner, and Robert Rodriguez, but it's just never come to fruition. No. And the legacy that is actually Guillermo del Toro will tell you that The Shape of Water is inspired by Creature from the Black Lagoon, because the creature in that does look very similar to the Gill Man. But like I say, this I'm not a big fan of remakes or reworking of it, but this is one that I would have actually welcomed.
Yeah.
And I would have loved to have seen it. So that's me finished.
Okay. Right. My last film is once again another film that was actually made, but is even more infamous for the production hell, and Justice League. So when Warner Brothers again. When Warner Brothers announced Justice League, I can't put into words the anticipation that this film brewed. The most iconic superheroes of all time finally onto the big screen together. But once again, it followed the DC trope of being a huge cinematic disaster on the big screen. The behind-the-scenes drama with this film has to be the most infamous of all time. It is almost legendary how badly run the production of this film was. Released on November 17th, 2017, the film grossed around $650 million worldwide, which is measly for a superhero film at the time, compared to, for example, Avengers Endgame, which is the highest grossing film of all time, with the worldwide gross of $2.7 billion. So when you put it into perspective, This just shows the difference in quality between the DC Extended Universe and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It actually had a worse debut than Batman v Superman, and it grossed $200 million less overall than the standalone Wonder Woman film. One of the many reasons for the shoddy quality of the film is because of the fact that it has, due to tragic reasons, two different directors. Zack Snyder was brought on to direct the first film in the DCEU, Man of Steel. After it being a decent success, he again directed the DCEU's second film, Batman v Superman. Halfway through the production, Snyder had to withdraw due to his daughter's tragic suicide. Warner Brothers had put in so much time and money into the film that instead of scrapping or starting over the project, they just decided to bring in Avengers Assemble director Joss Whedon. This is widely believed to be because they wanted to lighten the tone set by the Wonder Woman film. Also that Whedon was the director behind the much-loved and successful Avengers Assemble and its sequel, Avengers Age of Ultron. There was one glaring problem with this, though. Zack Snyder is a very dark and gritty director. You can see this in his films like 300 and Man of Steel. Whereas Joss Whedon is a very light-toned comedic director, perfect for Marvel, not necessarily for DC. And he was the writer of Toy Story as well, so you can see his.
Well, he made Buffy the Vampire Slayer as well, so that's kind of where it's aimed at.
His style is, yes.
Style is that.
Warner Brothers wouldn't budge on the release date, so Whedon had next to no time to finish the film, while implementing his style. This is the reason why this film is quite literally like two different films. The first half is the grounded dark grittiness you expect from Snyder and the DCEU, whereas the second half of the film is quite literally the film trying to be a Marvel film. He even stoops to the lows of Batman cracking one-liners and trying to be the funny guy. Yes, Batman, the most dark protagonist in film. It just isn't right. The film was a car crash from the beginning once again. A lot of this is due to the pressure from Warner Brothers. Snyder and Whedon just couldn't win. To make matters worse, Junkie XL was hired to make the soundtrack to this film because he obviously done the original Batman v Superman. It was brilliant and dark. It went really well with Snyder's half. Whedon's not so much. Whedon hired Danny Elfman to come on board and rework Junkie XL's original score and lighten the tone a bit. But like both directors, he didn't have any time to work with. So what we got in the end was quite literally one of the worst film scores ever made, and I've heard it. It's terrible. Warner Brothers gave time off to Henry Cavill as he was filming Mission Impossible at the time. There was one big problem with this though. He had this big chevron moustache in Mission Impossible, and of course Superman doesn't have any facial hair. He wasn't allowed to shave it off, so Warner Brothers spent a huge amount of money. I think the most money...
Not CGI removal of a moustache.
Yeah, money to CGI his moustache off his face. And now in doing this, they had to completely rebuild his face using the CGI. And it looked absolutely horrible, and it completely takes you away from the film. It's like that... with Mouth's the hardest in CGI because you got that uncanny valley.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it almost makes a mockery of Superman himself. It looks ridiculous.
Have they not heard of a fake moustache?
Yeah, true.
I mean, they could have saved themselves millions.
Well, I'll tell you what. Studio Bar Mission Impossible, they were actually going to sue them if they made him.
He actually shaved his moustache
because of he came back after rewrites. They didn't have any control over what he did now. Now, after years of Warner, also with the rewrites, Ben Affleck, he was big and bulky for. You can tell which was the rewrites.
Batman v Superman.
For parts of Justice League, parts that were filmed before, but then obviously rewrites. There's scenes where he looks really quite big, as in he's carrying a bit of weight on him, and he looks really tired and down and depressed. And you can tell they're just the rewrites of it. Now, after years of Warner Brothers denying it to be true, they recently released a Snyder cut of this film. A 4-hour bloated version of the first half, and even that was a letdown. And I just think maybe the DCEU is cursed. It's just they've had quite a few films, and the only real one that's got anywhere near Marvel levels is Wonder Woman. Apart from that, they've all been box office bombs.
Well, like I said, I think it's when you're going to make films like that, particularly with comic book characters. Where there is that love from the fans for those, I think you have to hire somebody who understands the material and is a fan themselves, and who will treat it with respect. and we've said, I mean, we keep going on back to Star Wars, but we've said about the latest three films, there doesn't seem to be that connection with the audience, and it's almost like they just shit on the audience because they don't care about the story, they don't care about the characters, and it shows a lack of respect, I think. And I think that's where a lot of films fail.
Well, that's the thing. It goes to show. Zack Snyder is a big fan of DC, and his films, his standalone films, are quite well received. You know, he got the job of Man of Steel from his 2009 film Watchmen, and that was another DC film, and then they brought in Joss Whedon, who was, of course, at Disney. You know, like I said, he done Toy Story. He was in Marvel, and you can't have the same passion for that when you've worked in Marvel. You know, so it just goes to show that you should actually be casting a director who fully cares about the project, because they're going to put 110% into it. You know, so
So there we go. That concludes our episode on development hell. Hope you've enjoyed it.
It's been a long one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. No, it's not. It's not just over an hour. I'd just like to thank you for joining us. I hope you will tune in next week. You can follow us for other content. We're on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We also have a website, filmgeezers.com.
And tomorrow we'll be also releasing another mini podcast, but it's a film review on Jaws. So stay tuned for that. And like I said, it's going to be about 20 minutes, and we're just going to review the blockbuster Jaws. So
So thank you for joining. Hope you join us again tomorrow. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.